A cold and flu season is here once again. Add to that a new variant of COVID-19. And while we are much better equipped to handle the coronavirus than we were in 2020 at the start of the pandemic, there are still challenges, including a current lack of pediatric COVID vaccines in some areas, as well as updated boosters for adults. We recently spoke with a former U.S. Surgeon General on the current situation and his new book detailing what it was like leading the charge against the initial surge of COVID-19. And here to talk about this and more is Dr. Jerome Adams, former Surgeon General of the United States and author of the new book, Crisis and Chaos: Lessons from the Front Lines of the War Against COVID-19. Dr. Adams, great to be with you again. Congratulations on the new book. And I want to get to that in a moment. But first, can you talk to us about why the boosters and the pediatric vaccine have been hard to come by? What do you know?
Well, that is a great question, and ironically, it's one of the major themes of my book. We keep making the same mistakes. We remember back in 2020, 2021, when we had difficulty rolling out the initial vaccines across the country, and we're seeing that same difficulty getting, as you mentioned, pediatric boosters available, but even updated vaccines for adults in many places, particularly when you talk about Novavax, which is now available. And it points to a lot of the underlying issues we have with public health infrastructure. We need to make sure we're appropriately funding entities at the CDC and at the FDA and beyond, so that when medications are approved, they're actually available.
I want to talk about the pandemic. I mean, you were on the front lines of the pandemic from the very beginning. We didn't know what was happening. And the title of your book really kind of says it all, Crisis and Chaos. Take us back to that time and talk to us about some of the lessons that you learned.
Well, the book was really therapeutic for me, to be honest, because when you're in the fog of war, you don't think about what you're doing. You just move ahead and do the best you can. But I remember back in early 2020 when we didn't know whether to bring groceries indoors and we were wiping down all of our groceries. When we didn't have enough PPE for everyone, and we were forced to resort to making homemade PPE out of T-shirts and rubber bands. And so I think the lesson there is that we have many more tools, and despite what people hear, we are in a much better place than what we were back in early 2020. However, unfortunately, due to politics, due to misinformation and disinformation, and due to fatigue, many people aren't leveraging or using those tools. So in the book, I give people personal tips about how to stay safe from COVID. I also talk about some societal things that we should be doing, like more wastewater testing and improving ventilation. These are low-lift interventions for individuals, but can have a big impact on us from a societal level.
I'm curious, what was your biggest challenge at the time as far as being Surgeon General?
My biggest challenge was that we had a once-in-a-century pandemic superimposed on top of a once-in-a-lifetime level of presidential election conflict. I'll give you a very real story that I tell in the book. October 2020, Joe Biden said that any president who was responsible for 200,000 deaths should no longer serve, because we'd had 200,000 deaths at that point. And he was rightly raising the alarm about an unacceptable number of deaths. Well, in 2021, we had over 450,000 deaths, twice as many. In 2022, we had still over 220,000 deaths, about 240,000 deaths. And this isn't to criticize Biden. It's to say that when you change the captain of the Titanic, but you don't change the course that we're going into, you're going to continue to hit that iceberg over and over again.
Biggest takeaway from the pandemic in your time as Surgeon General?
I'd say the biggest takeaway from the pandemic is the poor underlying health of Americans. So that's another topic I bring up in the book. The idea that we did so much worse than the rest of the world in terms of transmission in 2020 is a myth. We actually had about the same level of transmission of most comparable European nations. But where we did terribly was once you got COVID, you were much more likely to end up in the hospital and die if you were in America. And that had little to do with actual pandemic policies of the prior administration, but a lot to do with the fact that America is the most obese country. We have the highest high blood pressure rates. We still have some of the highest smoking rates. Our poor baseline health really impacted our ability to be resilient in the face of the pandemic. And we need to focus on creating healthier communities so that we can have healthier people and they will be more resilient whatever hits us in the future.
Well, Dr. Adams, thank you so much for coming on. Congratulations again on the book. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Check it out on Amazon, Target, Barnes & Noble, wherever books are sold.